You, WTNY, radio, scared, fear before, options, next.
It's been a minute since I done moved out here to New York City, and there ain't much to say about it. Well, except that it don't feel nothing like home, nor is it anything they advertise it to be. I never thought that I would get along with the city slicks. It turns out there's a whole ragtag bunch of us here, all drawn in for the same darn thing, a chance for some type of new life. Now, I ain't gonna complain about circumstance, especially one I put myself under. But this wasn't exactly what I signed myself up for either. I left my wife and our kids back home for their own safekeeping, thinking, like everyone else, that my decision to answer the call would be what would keep them safe, which, far as I can tell, has been a big old pile of rat turd bigger than what you see on the subways. Turns out them Democratic sons of guns don't know nothing about what's going on here. Being from the South, I brought my guns, my knife, my rodent repellent, and just about everything else I could think of that protects us against dangerous creatures back home. But it didn't take too long for us on the volunteer squad to notice that the advertisement was a bit of shit. It stated that rampant wild animals have been taking over New York City, looking for volunteers with experience in hunting to come up and stay, free of charge of course, to help us eradicate the rampant wildlife. We'll provide $1,500 a kill. Now that sounds like a good deal, but what they didn't tell us was that these creatures, well, they ain't no rodents that I've ever seen. Betsy back home, she begged me not to go. Told me that you can't trust nothing that the government says. But I didn't listen. I told her that when the United States of America calls on its citizens to take up arms, that it's my gosh darn right to do so. Telling her that it'd be okay, that we could use that money to help out on the homestead and give a better life to our kids. I told her I would be back in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail and that I'd be coming home a damn hero. Now, what that ad failed to mention was that the housing situation was about the same as living in a homeless shelter. We were shoved into tiny little apartments and had to share a bathroom with 20 plus people. The food was all military ready to eat shit, and that the creatures weren't animals but rather some sort of creature, a creature of unknown origins. Why don't I back up? This all started at the beginning of the year. Betsy and I was still living together with our kids, Daniel and Joseph. We was happy and expecting our third child in a few months' time. We didn't expect nothing to go wrong. Heck, who would? And yet, something terrible did happen. I was out at night closing up the coops, making sure all the animals were secured as my family was getting ready for bed. Now, when you live out in the middle of nowhere, you get used to the noises coming on at night, and sometimes you ain't as careful as you ought to be. That night was one of those nights. I could hear something flapping overhead, though I didn't think much of it at the time. Looking back, the story seemed clear as crystal. From the pitch black of the woods, I could hear a tick 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 noise coming from within what sounded like a bird, though not one I recognized. I stared out, trying my best to discern what the creature could be, but it was impossible to tell through that darkened canopy. I felt an odd sense of fear creeping down my spine that made my hairs stand on their ends. I remember telling myself to get a grip, that the woods are prone to strange noises, and that ain't nothing out there was worth getting all bothered about. I finished up my task as the bird continued its tick-tick, tick-tick reiteration. Feeling tense still, I went to the barn and grabbed my mag light just to get the heebie-jeebies off of me. The sound seemed like it had moved, but I couldn't quite tell where. I shined my light in every which direction, out towards the pond, out around the house, and eventually I started to trek through the woods. It was like I could tell there was some sort of presence out there, something that wasn't quite right, but all I had was suspicion and that growing, suspicious sound of that mysterious tick-tick, tick-tick sound. After a while of searching, my nerves still frayed, I decided it'd be best to turn back home. Be by the family in case there was something out there that shouldn't have been. That was when I heard it. The sound that still haunts me each damn night. The sound of my wife's scream raging through the night, followed by the sound of one of our guns popping off. I ran to the house fast that I could, swearing at myself for not being there to protect my wife, and fearing the absolute worst. I braced myself to kill whatever bastard entered my home, to break him apart limb by limb without mercy for daring to trespass on my property. Fear of what I might find inside surged through me as the terrible tick-tick, tick-tick. The sound resounded over and over again, but with a slightly higher pitch. Another gunshot went off as I rushed to the front door, looking every which way for whatever the hell could have made that noise. Tick-tick, tick-tick went the bird, my heart and the grandfather clock in some sort of sick unison of horrific nightmare. I was so scared of what I'd find and kicking myself the whole way there. The house was dark. Tick-tick, tick-tick. And still. When I reached the master bedroom, the sight I saw was worse than I could have conjured. Daniel, the oldest, looked stark white and was pointing a gun at my wife. Blood was gushing from her stomach and her nether regions, and her eyes were wide with shock. I didn't know what to think in that moment, and froze, taking in the scene, until some mad force broke through me and I darted towards Daniel like a maniac, knocking the gun from his hand as I began to beat him, blow after blow, in a fit of rage and confusion. I still don't know what would have happened if my wife wouldn't have stopped me. She cried out, telling me and pleading me to stop, and that it wasn't his fault. It took longer for my senses to catch up to me than I'd have liked, and when I did come to, it was obvious of the damage I'd done. Daniel's eyes were puffy. A river of blood was running from his nose, and there were finger-shaped bruises around his neck. The sight was grisly, as I tried my best to breathe and take charge of the situation. I needed to rush them to the hospital and get them sorted. My wife was in no state to drive, and there ain't no doctors who make house calls no more. I hauled Daniel, then my wife, into the car, still unsure of what had happened, and why she was insistent that it wasn't his fault, even though I believed her. She passed out soon as we were in the car, and I didn't know if I should wake her or not. I looked at both my son and wife in critical condition and had a big decision to make of leaving Joseph, a mere toddler at that time, who I could not find at home, or risk not getting Betsy and Daniel to the hospital 20 minutes away in time. I started to call 911, but then I stopped myself, unsure of how to explain the situation to them. I called out for Joseph one last time. The tick-tick, tick-tick noise of the bird was gone, though I could still hear its haunting call through my own heartbeat and the sound of the damn clock. Tick-tick, tick-tick. Something, God maybe, told me to go to the hospital, that Joseph would be okay and that the danger had gone. I didn't know what to think, but one glance at Daniel and my wife was enough to get me going on the road. I prayed that all would be okay, that whatever had happened had truly passed us by. I still am kicking myself for how I acted that night, that I didn't call a neighbor, and that I hadn't been inside the house to protect Betsy, Daniel, or Joseph. But I thank my lucky stars that things weren't any worse than they were, though the situation was still bad. The baby my wife was carrying didn't make it. The doctor questioned me real hard about what had happened, saying that he hadn't seen nothing like the shape of the fetus in his life, that it looked as if it had been forcefully sucked down the cervix, and a lot of its blood was drained in the process. I told him that I didn't know, and that was the truth. There were no gunshot wounds that anybody could find on my wife's body, or at least none that nobody told me about, so I covered for Daniel. Said that there was no way that he was involved, that he just found her that way, and I was so lucky that he did. But I wasn't sure. I made to have a private conversation with him, but one look at his face was just too much to bear. I asked the nurses if it was okay if I stepped out, that I needed to check on our other son who was with a neighbor. When I rushed home, I found him asleep and curled under a stack of blankets where he must have gone off to hide from the incident in the house. He looked so happy to see me, even though he kept on asking, "Where's Mama? Where's Mama?" A few days later, my wife came to, and the three of us, Betsy, Daniel, and I, we were able to discuss what had happened. They weren't sure what to say about it, really. Said it was all so unreal and hard to believe despite the evidence. At first I didn't believe Daniel. He said that there was some sort of creature. "It was like a real-life demon, Papa. I ran into the room when I heard her scream, and I saw a hideous bat-like creature with wings and no bottom half. And it was in the room with Mama. I didn't even think, Papa. I ran so fast to grab a gun. I could have hurt Mama, Papa. There was so much blood, and the creature didn't even seem bothered by the first shot, even though I'm sure I hit it. Its back was turned to me, so I couldn't see much, but it sounded like it was sucking on her insides like a straw. I had to fire a second round, and all it did was scare her, Papa. The demon just flew out the window of the house screaming." Betsy, still under a state of shock about the baby, wasn't able to offer much in collaboration, but it wasn't needed. What she did say was all the confirmation I needed. Tick-tick, tick-tick. As months went by, the sound of the horrendous tick-tick, tick-tick followed me everywhere. Although I knew that the creature was nowhere nearby, I could feel it in my heart, a heavy burden droning on of my failure as a husband, as a father, and of a protector, as more and more sightings of similar creatures began to be reported on the news. The news called one similar to what had entered our house a Manananggal or something like that, a vampire-like being that fell under the category of Aswang, known for its appetite for unborn children, ripping out the baby with its long nails and slurping them up, such as what had happened in our home with our unborn child. No one could tell us where they came from or why they had been invading the U.S., when they are most known for their attacks in the Philippine Islands. Some people went so far as to claim that the whole thing was just another CIA hoax, but our family, and those terrorized by them, we knew the horrible truth. I called it an act of patriotism earlier, me moving up to New York City to fight off the creatures, because that's the story I want to be known for. But the truth is, I just can't face Daniel, or Joseph, or even my wife for that matter. She swore I did everything I could, but I didn't believe that in my heart for nothing. I couldn't stand it no more. Couldn't be around the people I was supposed to protect, or see Daniel, my son, who still flinched slightly any time that I made to move my hand. The news had called the Aswang invasion in New York City an invasion of creatures. If I would have known that I'd be facing the same creatures that had destroyed my relationship with my family, I'm not sure if I could have come. I'd like to think that I would have taken my revenge, but the truth is, I feel like a coward and a big old piece of baloney most days. On the first day in the new city, I dropped my bags and took in my new home. Relief fled me then, a chance to get away, shove my heart in a drawer and focus on something else. Anything else, for a change. I've been here for a few months now, pouring my frustrations either into a pint over its tails or by tracking down the Aswang. It started as me trying to rid the world of my burden, but eventually just turned into killing just so I could afford another drink. What I learned from staying in the city is that we've all got our demons. At first, the city seemed like a hellscape, a constant reminder of my past of the nighttime passing of Aswangs with their terrible tick-tick, tick-tick. But eventually I grew numb. The city, bright with distractions, stopped bothering me after a while as I got to know the others, like me, who all came to this place for a second chance. All of us burdened, looking to be something better than what we actually were and where we came from. Excuses to say kept growing. The longer I stayed, the more tormenting it seemed to go back. I had already failed my family, and part of me knew that they were better off without me around. Back home, I'd always be Daniel's papa who hurt him, the husband who wasn't there to protect his wife, and inadvertently was responsible for the death of their not yet born child. Not to mention the police nosing about the story. Not sure they could trust the story of the man of God or whatever it's called. Wondering what the hell I did and if the story was all made up. No, I'd rather stay here, in the city that feels like it's been waiting for me, surrounded by the sound of the tick-tick, tick-tick, that roars at night and in the hearts of others like me underneath their coats, searching for a way to feel better about ourselves and forging a new life. The advertisement wasn't what it purported itself to be, but this city, this is where I belong, keeps me guessing, changing, and keeps me numb to the beat of the ever-triumphant warning that the monster had won, that I was a coward and can't return home, leaving me here, dancing to the beat, ignoring and ignoring, over and over, the beat of my heart, the tick-tick, tick-tick, until the old me disappears, or the aswang finally mistakes me as the corpse of my former self and consumes me instead.
You, the beauty and wolf. Ready. Scared. Fearful. Options. Next.